This is a very cool project I'm about to talk about because one, what was involved in it, and also I was personally involved with the project, so I'm very familiar with it, and there's a whole backstory. So high level overview, it was 68,000 microfiche. Those are the hardest to scan, the most cumbersome to scan microfiche, lots and lots of records. And more details will come later, but I'm gonna give you that background. So it started with a single call from a colleague of mine, a CEO at another organization. I've known him for a number of years through this industry, and the group's called the Independent Information Management Dealers Association, also known as IMDA. So I've known him for a few years through there, but he gave me a call one day and just said, Will, I've got this project working with a school district, a lot of fiche. How quickly can you scan it? And it was originally 30,000 microfiche. And I said, all right, well, we can do it in a couple weeks, no problem. Title indexing, easy peasy. But it was interesting because it wasn't the standard process of kind of feeling each other out and what do you do? What's your background? How's your security? Can you actually do this? Do you have clients? Because we'd known each other, CEO to CEO, or peer to peer, the trust was already built. So it was just a phone call and we got started very quickly. It ramped up very quickly and we started moving because the trust was already there. So that's one of the cool things about this project. Through that IMDA organization, this project got kicked off very quickly because of that built-in trust. So back to the actual project. So the background story is kind of fun, but the actual project. It started out as 30,000, 35,000 fiche, file level indexing just by the title strip. We were gonna scan them, get them the images, they were gonna load it into a system that they were providing to the school district. But then it morphed into student record level, meaning gotta go find the actual images to find the students on the microfiche and key that information, like student name, what school they were at, student number, date of birth, just fields related to the individual student, not just the fiche sheet as a whole. Another interesting part was we came to an agreement. We were gonna get the fiche sent to us to start scanning. It was supposed to be about 35,000 fiche, but then as the company that we were working with, as they got the materials from the client, they realized that client miscounted. It wasn't 35,000 fiche, it was about 65,000 fiche, so almost double, basically double what the client thought. And we said, no problem, we can still do it. Now these fiche, as I mentioned, they're fiche. There are two main types. There's a 208 image style and a 270 image style. These were the classic 208 image fiche. So on each microfiche, there were 208 images. So 65,000 fiche, 208 images per fiche. That's a lot of images. It's about what, 14 million or so, 12 to 14 million images that have to be scanned and then go through those to find the students. So it was already blossoming into a much larger project. And I didn't mention before, there's a timeline on this, a time crunch of getting it done. It was about 7 weeks it needed to be done. So scan the fiche, index the records. A lot to do. Not a lot of time to do it. Now, as we were, that initial discussion with me and the CEO and then getting the project ready to send to us and going through all the processes to get the project moving, we did get a sample. We asked them to send us some records. They did. We got some sample fiche and we tested them. We found out there's about 1 student record for every roughly 1.5 to 2 images. So occasionally you can have student records that might be 5, 10 images per record. These are very small records. That means a lot of images, about 14 million images or so, and a lot of indexing because every 1.5 to 2 images, we are indexing a record. This is definitely blossoming and blooming into a much larger, intensive project than it originally began as 30,000 fiche title level indexing. Not that we couldn't do it, but we just realized, wow, we have about 7 weeks to do all this, and there's a lot to do. That's a key point about testing, and even though I knew the CEO, we knew the company, we've done many fiche jobs, fiche jobs before, we've done student record indexing, sampling is essential to pricing out a project and making sure the scope is nailed down to make sure you can do that at scale. So that was a critical part that we did get the sample, we knew what we were doing so we could kind of build the process flow almost before we got the project because we knew we had to be moving fast. So samples are essential. If you're working with a company, you want to get those samples done so they know exactly what they're dealing with before you start the project proper. And you can imagine if we did something wrong here, we had a wrong assumption or guessed wrong in some sort of spec, it would have been disastrous because kind of like a plane, when you're flying along on a plane, just 1 degree change off over a 5-hour trip, instead of being in San Francisco, you're up in Seattle. It's a big difference on large projects. So it was critical that we nail it down tightly during that sample so we knew what we were getting into. And of course, as the project goes along, we're gonna refine and improve, but in the beginning, you gotta get started right. So we had the sample, fiche were on their way, when they get to us, we had the process flow built because we had that sample, and we started scanning, and we had 65,000 fiches to scan, and we wanted to get those cruising along because we couldn't do any indexing, we couldn't do any student record identification and keying the data without the scanned images. So we had to get those moving quick. And even something like this where there's 65,000 confiches, is a lot of confiches to scan. The scanning is kind of the easy part because we have the machines, we have the people, it's getting the physical record scanned. That's kind of just a labor process. The harder part is after the fact in getting that identification and keying going. So a lot of people think, geez, that's a lot of records to scan. That's not really too bad. I mean, it's just sort of get the fiche, get them scanned, and that's that part of it. It's the post-processing, the indexing, the QA. That's really where this project needed to be heavily watched. Of course, we had to get the fiche scanned. We had to make sure they moved along because we had timetables to meet. But we did the scanning in about, it was like 3 to 4 weeks. And of course, as fiche got scanned, the ones that were digitized right away into that keying process so we could get the record scanned. Now, another interesting thing about the project, there was a bit of a budget constraint because the client had already agreed with our partner, the company we were working with, of a certain amount for a project based on what they originally thought the project was. So we actually couldn't get everything done right away. We had to phase it out. So we decided we were going to scan all 65,000 confiche, but then only index the amount of student records up to their budget amount. So we actually had to break it up into 2 phases, which worked out because that timeline, once we learned there were double the amount of fiche, double the amount of records, it would have been a bit tricky to match that. But we were able to get to plan for the original scope that we were envisioning with around 30,000 fiche. But we scanned all the fiche, get those done, and then we moved into the indexing. Part of that scanning process, definitely a big part of this project was the ramp up. So we didn't just scan all the fiche and then all of a sudden we're just hammering away millions of images delivered every week. That's not how it works. We had to really scale up. We were using multiple of our subcontractors to make sure we could get it done. It was a project in itself just to manage the people we were working with to make sure we could get everything keyed. So as we're scanning the fiche, scan, which we did in about, again, 3 to 4 weeks, those fiches that were scanned got moved into the process flow to index. The first week we got, 50, 60,000 records done. Doesn't sound like a lot when you have to do about 5 million in 7 weeks. But then by the next week, we were at about 400,000. The week after that, we're like 600,000. Then we were at about around 900,000 to 1 million a week because we ramped up the scale, and then we got to a point where, all right, we are on the timeline to hit the number we need to get, the indexed, the records completed number based on the budget, and we are on track to do that based on the ramp up schedule and the partners we're working with. So it's almost reverse engineering a bit. You say, here's the budget amount in the timeline. If I need to do this, that means I need to do this many records a day, and then you kind of backtrack it to, I scanned all these, get these done, process them, how many do I need to do a week? Every single day our project team was looking at this saying, where are we? Are we behind? Are we ahead? Can we pull back here? Do we need to push ahead here? It was very intense, very exciting, but we had that ramp up, which is a critical part. It doesn't just snap, everything's moving at 100 miles an hour. There's a bit of a ramp up like a Ferris wheel or a merry-go-round. It's that flywheel concept where, imagine you're trying to, or like one of those things on the parks, those little spinny things we hold on and the kids are holding on for dear life as it spins around. Getting one of those started, it's hard. You gotta pull hard, you gotta really grind it and get it moving. But once it's going, you just kind of tap, and it just spins fast. That's like this project. It was a lot of effort to get it going, but once we got to that point, that tipping point of we have the fiche scanned, we have all the keying processes down, our subcontractors are working, everyone's on the same page, then we just started tapping along, just watching it, refining it, tweaking it, and it got moving to get that 7-8 week timeline. So as I mentioned before, a lot of this tied around to the budget. So there's a certain dollar amount that the client of our client could not go over. So we had to work with that. So although we estimated about 7.5 million records from these 65,000 confiche, there was a finite budget that we couldn't get all those right away. We decided, again, we'd scan all the fiche, get the digital images to our clients. So at least the school district they were working with, they had the images. And then we did it was like 4.8 or about 5 million records were keyed and delivered because that fit under the budget, the price of scanning the fiche, all 65,000, and then that gap of how many records can we scan within that budget. So we got about 5 million records and all 65,000 fiche. So that was phase 1. And then a couple months later, they got more funding, and then our partner said, BMI, go ahead and finish it out. And then we did another 2.5 million or so records. We had already scanned the fiche, so we already had the images. We were just waiting to hear the go to finish that out. So we did that as a phase 2, about 2.5 million records. We already had the scale, we already had the processes. So we kind of got going quickly and finished that quickly because everything was already in place for phase 2. One of the essential aspects of this project was it was called the hybrid engine. It wasn't just people doing everything, and it wasn't just technology. It was an absolute hybrid of machine learning, software, technology, and then the human element. You have to have the humans scan the fiche. That was essential. Got to get that going. Getting the project started between BMI and the company you're working with, just that phone call to start. You have to have people involved in that, of course. But scanning the fiche, setting up the projects, coordinating the different partners, there's that big human element. But then there's the technology element, machine learning of forms recognition, cutting fields or basically fracturing fields so we can utilize that for keying, reprocessing the images, putting them back together, then tying the roughly one and a half images per student record, 1 to 2 pages, merge them together, deliver them properly, delivering every single week. We were doing a hard drive a week of million records or so, sending them to our partners so they could get them to their load them into their system for their client. There were many pieces, and it was a hybrid of human and technology, which is, these days everyone thinks, oh, it's AI tech. There's always tech, there's always AI, technology, machine learning, but you have to have the people that know what to do. That's an essential part too. So this was a great example of that, where it's not just humans just hand jamming it, ham and egging and labor. There was absolutely coming up with the plan, testing, building something, and then making sure it's running when the technology is in place. I'm starting to wrap up here. Another aspect that I thought was very useful for this project, very effective, it wasn't just a generalist doing the project. It wasn't just, hey, I can do anything, let me do this project. Sure, I'm a Me Too type of company. They do that, I can do it. That's not what happened here. The client went to our client, the scanning company or the other company that we were working with, because they're specialists with school districts and student records. So that's a specialist niche mentality of, they went to them, they had an agreement, they have a software platform, they have other things they're doing with them. This was a small piece of the overall project, but they were a specialist. Then that company came to us because they know that we're specialists in microfiche scanning, microfilm scanning, those kind of things. And we have the technology for the high quantity indexing, getting these projects done, but specifically microfiche. They said, you can do this, we have our piece, we want you to do this piece. So it wasn't just one generalist company trying to do everything, be the best at all aspects. It was two specialists working together to get the project done most effectively. So specialization was key here. They had the contact with the client, they had the overall education lane that they were already working, they had a software platform, and they came to us for the specialization in microfiche scanning and conversion. Time to close it up. The real lesson and next steps here, there's the nuance of scanning, scanning is the hard part. But with this project, scanning is the easy part. It was really the ramp up, the getting things going properly so we could scale, and the keying. So you always got to think of the different pieces in a project. And for this one, it was definitely being able to scale a project up over a couple weeks and then hit that tipping point where you were just moving along like a flywheel, like the merry-go-round, just tapping it along because we had the proper setup. So that ramp period was critical. This was a major COM microfiche and indexing job, but with any job, it's absolutely important that you test it, you get a sample, so your scanning partner knows what they're going to be dealing with. Because if you do have a time, especially if you have a timeline, you don't want to get the material to them and it's different than what everyone planned, or they haven't been able to test it yet and it just dogs down. Now everyone's rushing. You want to have that built and set up, or at least the understanding of what's going to be built based on actual records. A sample is essential. That's a lot of information now. Clearly this is a project that went well. I'm happy to have been a part of it. Great things occurred. But if you're wondering, well, I have my own project, yours went great, well, what are things that could go wrong? What should I avoid? Great question. You should watch this video here. 4 scanning mistakes that we have seen many times that you'll want to avoid and how to avoid them. So take a look at that and keep watching for next videos as they come out. Thanks again.